Welcome to this explainer. Today we're doing something really cool. We are taking a look right under the hood of visual storytelling. We're looking at the anatomy of a scene, specifically deconstructing a documentary prompt. We're going to see how just a handful of carefully chosen words can instantly build an entire world, establish a character, and crack up that narrative tension. So, grab your mental director's chair, because we're diving right in.
Let's start with our overarching vision. The prompt literally reads, create an 8-minute, ultra-realistic cinematic documentary titled 7 Warning Signs Your Body Needs More Vitamin B12. What's absolutely fascinating to me here is the sheer precision of it. It doesn't just ask for a basic script, it demands an ultra-realistic cinematic style, locks us into a very specific 8-minute runtime, and dictates a grounded, serious tone right out of the gate.
And that brings us to our next phase, the protagonist and establishing the baseline. Because, before we can even think about introducing any sort of conflict, we absolutely need a character to actually care about.
Just look at these exact demographic traits pulled straight from the text. We aren't just told to show a random person, right? We're given 4 very distinct pillars: healthy, American, senior man, late 60s. The crucial point here is how this builds a highly specific mental image for casting in our minds. When you hear late 60s combined with healthy, you instantly picture someone who's probably pretty active. Maybe they're out there enjoying retirement, taking good care of themselves. This is not someone who's already battling a chronic illness. This is a guy in the absolute prime of his golden years. And establishing that baseline, it is absolutely critical for what happens next. Because right here, we see a brilliant illustration of the core of narrative drama, which is contrast. On one hand, we have our established baseline, our healthy American senior. But then, that clashes directly with our inciting incident, waking up feeling unusually tired. The friction between these two states is exactly where the story lives. Because he's so healthy normally, this sudden, unexpected fatigue instantly signals to the viewer that something is very wrong. It sets the stage perfectly for a documentary about the warning signs of a vitamin B12 deficiency.
Now, let's look at staging the symptoms, visualizing the conflict. What I love here is that the prompt completely avoids lazy exposition. Instead, it relies purely on physical actions to pull us right into the character's internal struggle.
Let's just walk through this chronological sequence of physical acting directions for a second. Step 1, waking up unusually tired. That sets the mood right away. Then, step 2, rubbing his forehead. That's a universally recognized physical shorthand for fatigue, or brain fog, or maybe a mild headache, which are all classic B12 deficiency symptoms. Then we get step 3, walking slowly. His physical mobility is literally being weighed down, which totally contradicts that healthy baseline we established a minute ago. And finally, step 4, looking concerned. This is huge because it moves the symptom from a purely physical domain into a psychological one. He knows something isn't right. Through just 4 simple beats of blocking, the scene visually communicates a complex medical warning sign, and it does it without a single line of dialogue.
And that brings us to the cliffhanger, a deliberate cut. At the very end of our source text, the scene direction just suddenly stops. Now, in the context of cinematic storytelling, treating this abrupt end in the text as a masterful narrative feature rather than a mistake is just brilliant.
Here is the literal cut-off phrase from the source text. Transition to A. That is it. It just stops. In film editing, we call this a smash cut. Just as our protagonist is looking concerned, just as he's realizing his unusual fatigue is actually a real problem, the narrative engine abruptly halts. It perfectly mimics a dramatic, cinematic transition right at the exact moment the tension peaks.
Which, of course, leaves us with this final question: what does this transition to? Does it cut to a dramatic title card, maybe a doctor sitting in a chair explaining vitamin B12? Or what about a cool microscopic animation of the bloodstream? The prompt actually leaves us with this unresolved mystery, which really proves how just a few sentences can completely hook an audience. So I want you to keep this framework in mind the next time you watch a documentary. I promise you'll start seeing these invisible scripts everywhere. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I leave you to ponder what exactly comes next.